In order to make a compelling app, it has to be designed well. We've all picked up a phone and looked at an app and said, yeah, that one looks great. And then also looked at ones and said, oh, well, the design on this one isn't very good. So what makes the difference between a well-designed app and a not-so-well-designed app? Well, we're not going to give you a whole background in design. That's a whole profession unto itself. But we are going to show you 6 key things that if you remember these things, I promise you that you're going to have good-looking apps. And you'll be able to communicate with other designers in a language that they understand. So the first thing, and I'm starting it with this 0 element here, is who. You have to start with, who am I making this application for? The kind of thing that goes on with a weather app for somebody who's a very casual user versus someone who really wants to see a lot of data, they're going to be different things. You can't have one particular idea dominate the other. It's really about your audience. So before you can really answer any questions of how should this look and how should it behave, you have to ask, who am I making it for? Next, a very key component for design with mobile, cues. Go ahead and look at this application here on your left, and I want you to tell me how many things are touchable. This little arrow here lets us know that there's some type of navigation, and that if I press that, I'm going to go somewhere else. Here we have a picture of a magnifying glass, but because it's beveled around the edges, we know that it's a button and not just a picture. As for these other elements down here, you notice that Spotlight is different than art or contacts. It looks much more like a header, and those are visual cues to let us know how it might behave. Using cues are really important because your user doesn't know necessarily what is going to happen when they touch or interact with your application. It's up to you to provide them cues to let them know intuitively where to go to get things to react. So let's take a look at a poorly designed application. Already we have a couple of issues, and let's highlight them now. Create account thing down here, I'm not really sure if that's a button or not. And this email and password field looks like it's a single field. However, if I add in cues, I can instantly get some reinforcement that login and create account are definitely buttons, and that email and password are different fields. In fact, this little hint text here tells me already that that's the type of information I should be putting in there. Using cues effectively are going to help people navigate your app without you having to tutorialize or explain things to them. Fingers. This is a big one that is really frustrating to me personally when I'm working with people who have come over from web. The thing is, with a mobile application, your finger size is actually pretty large. It's not the same thing as a cursor on a screen, and you have to take that into account when you're looking at the size of your objects. Nothing is more frustrating to a user than to want to press one thing and found out that they thumbed it and pressed something else. That's the reason why you should really pay attention to space relative to the actual device size for anything that you're going to create. Here you can see we made things bigger, and there's less of a likelihood that when I press Remember Email that I'm going to mispress and also get Remember Password. It's really just about spacing. So when designing an application, keep that into consideration not only for small phones, but also for large tablets. Have you ever had somebody refer to something as, oh, that's a very clean design? Well, a lot of people may not understand exactly how you get from something that it isn't clean to clean. And I'm going to show you the trick. It's really just about drawing lines and using a grid. Notice how much cleaner this design looks from the one on the left. What's the main difference? Well, if we were to put lines of a grid and to show every place where your eye is moving up and down for any of these elements, you'll see that there's a lot of different lines, and a lot of them are not necessarily equally spaced from each other. Whereas the design on the right, you can see it's a much simpler grid. Anytime you're designing an application, try to keep things to a simple grid as much as possible. It's not only easier to code, but it looks cleaner too. Color, size, and shape. This is where you get to actually communicate to a user. It's one thing to have things on a grid, but it's another thing to actually draw their attention, and you can do that with the language of color, size, and shape. Notice that this application looks pretty clean, but if we just add in a little bit of change to what things are colored and what things are sized, we communicate a lot more to the user. Here we have a login button that's much larger and clearer, that is going to be the most active thing you're going to want a user to do. On top of that, our cool pass header now looks a lot better. If you work with a designer, you'll find out that they know a lot about color, size, and shape when it comes to typefaces and different graphics. And you should trust their opinion as much as possible because that's what they study. But if you're not working with a designer and just working on apps on your own, just know that color, size, and shape communicate something, and you need to be careful about that because what you use actually is sending a message to your user. And you can use it effectively or ineffectively depending on your choices. So just be mindful about your color, size, and shape when you're adjusting your UI elements. Finally, feedback. This is actually the most important part for mobile design. And I'll show you how this works. If you were to ask me a question, and I were to not respond at all like this, you would think something is wrong. However, if you were to ask me a question and I would respond in this way, hey, can you hold on one second? I just need to do this thing over here. You're going to wait a much longer time and be much more comfortable. It's really important when we're designing our applications to have them give feedback to the user all the time. It's what makes the difference between a user thinking an application is broken and a user just thinking that something needs to be waited on. Throughout all our software development, we're going to focus very heavily on making sure that the main UI thread is always updating the screen with relevant information. To do so is going to give the user an experience where they believe that your app is something that is working and is lively as opposed to dead or broken. Using these 6 guides to design is going to make the difference from your applications looking like something that was hacked together to something that was created and developed in a professional manner.